Headline, Pomp broke Andrew Tate.
So how did you two meet?
There's two versions of the story. There is the truth.
When you start out, it's all rosy. What do you do the first time that someone's like, you're dumb?
I have this like Michael Jordan thing. It just motivates me.
Yes.
You know, Tim Ferriss has a very articulate post about, I don't want to be famous. At one point, I worked very closely with Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg.
Was there a moment when you go like, okay, I can do this. This is going to work.
I have no fear whatsoever of being wrong in public.
They're only boring because you haven't asked them the right questions yet. I think The Rock is the type of person.
If you're going to regret after the 10 years being like, man, if I had bet on myself, like what could have happened?
All right, let me get this right. Bang, bang. Welcome to another exciting episode of The Good Times. I always wanted to say that.
He's been practicing.
I've been practicing. And was that a good bang, bang? Did I get that right?
It's very solid. You nailed it.
I try. I know owe you a royalty check, but no. Thank you so much for joining us on what is a very, very special episode. We have two guests who need absolutely no introduction. The one and only Polina Marinova Pompliano, founder of The Profile. Somebody I've followed for a long, long time for her work at Fortune and elsewhere, and now her amazing newsletter. And the one and only Anthony Pompliano, he never sleeps, crypto never sleeps, and we've all seen this stuff. Pomp needs no introduction. But oh my God, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys.
I am just happy to be here with you. It's perfect.
How often do you both get to do stuff like this together, where you're the guest and you both get to sit in?
Not too often, actually.
Never.
Usually I'm invited and he's not, but this isn't nice of you to include him.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we just wanted you, but I thought Pomp would be pissed off. He'll whine, he'll cry.
He's on his way in, yeah.
Yeah. We just edit his part out after this. But okay, let's start with the really serious, gritty stuff up front, okay? Like a real hardball question. So how did you two meet? What's the meet cute story? Give us the details.
It's a great question, Sriram.
Okay. There's two versions of the story.
The truth
and then
her
there
version.
is the truth. No. No.
Remember, we fact check everything.
This is already so exciting. Yeah. I can't wait. This is awesome.
No misinformation on this show. We fact check everything.
Okay, high level version. We met on Twitter, ironically, when I had way more Twitter followers than Anthony. I had like 3,000-4,000. He had like 65. So I was like, what's another follow for this guy? And then he took it to mean like, a reporter is interested in my work. So I had written an article about this tech company, and then he had tweeted it, and I saw that. And so I liked the tweet. And I followed him. And then, because I saw he was an investor, whatever, early stage startups. And then he said, oh, do you want to go get coffee? And then we got coffee, except we just like talked about a lot of stuff. And then we've kept talking since then. Oh. You see how I did that?
Wow.
So the best way to translate that is if you have 65 followers and somebody follows and likes stuff and does all that at one time, you're under attack. Like I had a notification in like 3 weeks. So I was like, oh, this person must be trying to get my attention here.
Oh, God.
The grand romantic gesture of the Twitter like, right? Like, that person's interested in you.
I was just interested in my article, but I appreciate it.
Oh, my goodness. And okay, so I feel like I've known both of you, for a long time, and a lot of people may not know this, but Pomp and I have actually known each other for over a decade, and actually at one time worked.
I'm sorry, Pomp. So sad. That's terrible.
And actually at one time worked together at Facebook ads way back in the day. But Pomp, you have such a fascinating story. And when I talk to people about you, I'm often reminded how many people actually don't know your story. So I want to kind of hear the first one, because the part, maybe even for Facebook, it's super fascinating, is you served in the armed forces, and you actually talked a lot about how it's impacted you. So talk to us a little bit about your story and background from there. And also for those of us who have not served, like how did you change? What did that leave you with?
Yeah. The short version is basically I played football in college, was in the military, deployed to Iraq in 2008, 2009. I came out of there, finished school, and built and sold 2 very small software companies. Went and worked at Facebook, then spent a little bit of time working at Snapchat, and then started investing full time. And pretty much I've been doing that now for, I don't know, 8 years or so. I would say that there was 2 like major inflection points maybe in my career. One was the military. I went when I was 20 years old to Iraq. I had my 21st birthday in the desert, and I joke, but there's a sense of truth to it. Is like I showed up a little boy and I left, a little bit more experienced little boy, and came back to kind of the real world. And it was just it was a shock, right? Like you basically go from college looking to see when's the next party, or what person will, what girl or whatever will talk to you.
Hey.
All the time.
or follow and like you on Twitter.
Yes,
there
exactly.
were no girls before.
And so you kind of go from that environment to all of a sudden I was deployed, and most of the guys were kind of in late 20s, and they're worried about their mortgages, their wives, their kids. It's just a kind of crazy switching of circumstances, and then you add in kind of the violence and combat and kind of the war component to it, and you just grow up pretty quick. And so I think that was one big thing, maturity. I went to a number of different types of leadership schools in the military, which probably were pretty helpful over time. But the biggest takeaway is just like, you're going to die. Sounds super morbid, but like all 4 of us will die. Everyone listening to this, you're going to die. Sorry, game over. And so then I think you just switch your mentality from this, like, you get clarity around like what matters and what doesn't matter. And you begin to enjoy things a lot more. So I think that was kind of a positive coming out of that scenario. And the second one was Facebook. Like, I built 2 companies before that, but like companies may be a very loose, kind way to describe it. Like basically I was, searching in the dark, trying to figure out how the hell to do this. And when I went to Facebook, you watched a front row seat of some of the top operators in the world. And, Sheryl, I always joke that one of the ads meetings every week, you walked in and like, if you didn't know you were at Facebook, you'd be wondering where you were. Because there's like people, sitting on top of filing cabinets, and just like not exactly the corporate environment that most people think of. But damn, did it work? And Sriram, obviously, you were a huge piece of a lot of the ad revenue growth there. But there's many other people that worked with that were just amazing operators. And so I think just getting that crash course, right? It was like better than an MBA in some ways. And those 2 experiences, I think, were probably the big inflection points.
But I just want to say, Pomp, I remember we used to have these weekly ad meeting at Facebook, and it was so clear that Pomp was one of the sharpest people in the room. And we didn't really work super close together, but I remember being like, who's this guy? Because you always had the smartest things to say, and you just keep an eye out. And so this is a very, very different era, but Pomp stood back then.
What is this, like, keep an eye out? Are you like going to like take him in an alleyway? Like what's
Well, you always trying to spot talent. And that was a very, that was
a Facebook thing to do. Is somebody in this room? It's like literally like you're sitting there. You're like, people in this room are going to. No, it's like people in this room are definitely going to go create billion-dollar companies. People in this room are definitely going to go be executives at future companies that aren't even created yet. And so you kind of, I don't know. Sure, you probably can articulate this better than I can, but like to some degree, it's a special time because you realize like Facebook probably while I was there went from maybe 4,000 employees to like 12,000. And like just when you have that type of hyper growth and all the stuff that's happening, you just realize like a lot of companies don't get to go through this.
I think in 2022 it may sound bizarre to people, but at 2012 to 2015 Facebook, everyone was an A-list player, and it was incredibly collaborative but also competitive at times. And those meetings were some of the smartest people I'd ever worked with. So when somebody really stood out, and Pomp really stood out, he knew his shit, when he spoke, everyone paid attention. You're like, wait, somebody's standing out in this A-list people, somebody to keep an eye on. But Pomp really started even 10 years ago.
Yeah,
I paid Sriram a lot of money to say all these nice things.
That cost you a lot. Polina, I want to know your story too. Fortune, Sriram and I growing up when we moved to Silicon Valley, Fortune's the one magazine we'd like looked up to a lot, right? Like, we'd see people attend these events. We'd see people showing up at the cover of it, and we're like, oh my God, like so accomplished. It's a really hard decision, I'd assume, to leave, an institution like Fortune and to go out solo, do it yourself, go direct kind of thing. Tell me your story leading through Fortune and then like after that as well.
Yeah. So my family is from Bulgaria. I was born there. I went to first and second grade there. My parents won the green card lottery.
Wow. Wow.
So-
We know what a big deal
I
that
mean,
is.
trust me, I mean, yeah, I can't imagine how
Like a
life-changing that must have
decade-long
been.
waiting process. We totally get it. Like all our friends went through this from India. It's just crazy. So
It's-
yeah.
It's pretty
It's
insane. My dad was determined to get out of Bulgaria. So he applied, I think the lotteries at the time were the US, Canada, and Australia. He applied to all of them. So, and he submitted applications for both him and my mom. So the surface area of winning was a little bit, in his favor. So my mom ended up winning. And that was in 1999. And then in 2000, we moved to Atlanta, Georgia. The only reason being we knew people here. So after you win the lottery, you have to go to the embassy and prove that like you're not going to be homeless or jobless. So we found some random distant family friend who was happy to sponsor us.
Yeah.
So we ended up in Atlanta. And so we came here, I was 8 turning 9. And then growing up in Atlanta, I went to the University of Georgia. I majored in journalism there. I worked at my high school newspaper. And then at Georgia, I became editor-in-chief of the school paper. And from there, I was like, I'm set for life. I had internships at USA Today, CNN. I was like, who wouldn't want to hire me?
Yeah.
And then the answer was nobody wanted to hire me. I still remember I got a job offer from this newspaper in rural Georgia, and the salary, this is annual salary. While you were at Facebook, I was getting offered $18,000 a year.
Oh my God.
And so
That's like, isn't that below minimum wage?
that was, I don't even like, I was offended, but I was like, wow. I mean, it is
Somebody's
a
willing
job.
to pay me. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the cost of living wasn't that expensive there. But
yeah,
I knew my whole life, I was just like, I had the mentality of, I don't want to be a big fish in a small pond. I'd way rather be a small fish in a big pond. So I wanted to move to New York. That was my dream.
Mm.
But in the meantime, while nobody was hiring me, I needed money. So I did the thing where I graduated college and I moved back home. I lived on my mom's couch, and before remote work was a thing, I worked remotely for USA Today, and I worked physically at CNN because the CNN headquarters is in Atlanta. So I would go to CNN in the morning from like 7 to 4 or something, and then drive home and work remotely for USA Today from 6 to 11 p.m. And I just like was saving all the cash. So I paid off all my student debt, and I was like, I'm ready. I can move to New York now and make $20,000 a year. No. So then after a year, I got a job at a startup in New York, moved there. And then from there, made it to Fortune. And I got to Fortune not in a reporting role, but in a audience engagement role, which was like social media account person at the time. And so, yeah, from there, I just, I weaseled my way into writing, tech, the newsletter term sheet. And then that was my dream job. And then I left to start my own newsletter.
Yeah.
Your story is so fascinating. By the way, first of all, you folks are the first couple we've had on the sort of the YouTube version of the show. We're kind of starting off with like probably the most powerful couple in technology. And
yeah, oh my God, Alexis and Serena, if you're listening.
Well, you folks are like the number one power couple out here. But I was thinking about this when I was preparing for this. There's actually one interesting common thread between both your stories, which is in an alternative timeline, there's a version of Pomp who's a VP at Facebook or a FANG company who kind of has that career. And Pomp, trust me, folks, is more than capable of killing it in like a product engineering type role. And you kind of made it into the belly of the beast. You're at a premier institution, and there's kind of a ladder there. You become editor. You kind of like climb the journalism career ladder. And so, Polina, maybe starting with you, like, what made you maybe go, and others have done this, like, Barry Weiss and some others have done this, but we go, okay, I'm going to leave leave the logo, the fortune, the brand, and I'm going to, kind of but trust myself and my audience building capability and make that plunge. Like, what made you do that? Because both of you made that plunge in different ways.
Yeah. So, by the way, when I left, because I started thinking about this in January of 2020, I don't think reporters had left to do independent Substacks at the time. At least I didn't know any when I was making the decision. So the only person I knew and talked to was the browser. and Robert, and I talked to him, and then I was like, I think I can do this. And like when you hear something once and then you start seeing it everywhere, I started seeing like the rise of the passion economy and all this stuff. But then ultimately I thought, at Fortune, I write about entrepreneurship, but I've never started a business. Like I kind of felt like a hypocrite a little bit in terms of I'm writing and critiquing and analyzing these people's companies, whereas I myself have never undergone that. And Anthony and I obviously had a lot of discussions about leaving. And I like to think that in our relationship, like I'm kind of the brakes and he's more of the gas. So I'm very, very risk averse. So I backed my way into how many paying members of the profile do I need to match my salary at, I was going to say Facebook, not Facebook, at Fortune, because to me that was success. And so we backed our way into that number, and then I thought it was realistic. So I left in March of 2020.
And do you remember what moment made you go? Because by the way, folks, we're going to leave all the links here, but if you haven't already subscribed to the profile, go read it. There's some amazing stuff in there. Not everyone gets a rock to engage with you. We'll get to the rock later. But, was there a moment when it must have been scary, right? And you kind of, and was there a moment when you go like, okay, I can do this. This is going to work. Something's taken. Was there like a catalytic moment?
Yeah, there was one moment. I was on the subway in New York, and I just like kept thinking about it. And I called it the seesaw of misery. Like I would wake up and I'd be like, absolutely, I'm going to leave my job. And then before I went to bed, I was like, are you crazy? Like you worked so hard to get here. Why would you ever leave now? And I think I had a few so the question that pushed me over the edge was, I've been at Fortune for 5 years. If I stay another 5, will I have learned more or less than if I leave, do the profile, fail miserably, or in 5 years, will I have learned more from this experience instead? And the answer was the latter. So that's what kind of pushed. I'm curious, do you remember this time?
I remember. I remember it very well.
I mean,
the one thing I would add, I think, is Polina is very risk averse, but like in like an intelligent underwriter of risk way. So there's some people who are just like, I don't want to take any risk at all. So like, I'm going to sit inside like, bubble boy, right? And like not go outside because like it may rain today. But Polina is much more, I think, like calculated risk.
Yeah.
And a huge piece of the conversation, there was 2 pieces. One was like, just like the math, right? Like when you're like, hey, I'm going to quit my job, that sounds insane. But then if you're like, oh, I'm going to quit my job and I have to get, X number of subscribers, whatever the number was. Okay, well, like how many do I have now? How much would I have to get each month for the remainder of the year to like get there? But, oh, could I do that? Like, yeah, that's slower growth than I already have right now. It's like, I'm probably going to get there anyways. What if I leave and focus on it full time rather than just do it like a weekend thing? Right. So I think there was like a lot of just like, what is the math here? And like, how do you make that work? But the other thing too, which is probably a common theme in our relationship, and I like to think that we've kind of helped other people in our lives learn over time. It's just like betting on yourself, right? And it sounds so cliche and so stupid and all stuff, but it goes to Polina saying like, you could work somewhere for 10 years and, it's a great life. It is perfect for a lot of people. But if you're going to regret after the 10 years being like, man, if I had bet on myself, like what could have happened? Like you better go bet on yourself. And the thing that I do think is true for many people in the tech industry specifically, Sriram, when I saw it on Facebook a million times, people would leave, go work somewhere, and like 2 weeks later they'd come back and be like, hey, I'm back. You'd be like, wait, we just had like a big party for you like 2 weeks ago. Like you're leaving after, like 7 years.
Now there is even a phrase for it. It's called the boomerang.
Boomerang, right? So like, so like the boomerang definitely is more likely to happen in like tech, in journalism, like all these things where they're glad to have you back. So in some way it's almost like, you can do it and try it out. And if you don't like it, you can come back in like 2 months. And so I think probably the scariest part that Polina is downplaying a little bit is that she made the decision before like the pandemic stuff like really hit.
Yeah.
And so she put in her notice, 2-3 weeks, whatever it was. And her last week was the day that they announced all the lockdowns in New York.
Wow.
So like you're basically like walking out the door. There is no, big party or anything because you're sitting at home already. And then they're like, oh, by the way, we're shutting down the entire city. And you're like, oh my God, like what is about to happen, right?
And this is a really good lesson that I learned is that you can plan and prepare for the worst. I think I made Anthony made me do this because I kept going back and forth. He was like, make a pro and con list. Like, what are you afraid of basically? Why won't you quit? And on the con list, my biggest fear was like, I read about this stuff all the time. It's a 10-year cycle. There's going to be a recession. Why would I leave right before a recession? But then you realize, like, even if you work a nice, safe, comfortable job, there is no guarantee that you're not going to get laid off. So anyway, so I was like, oh my God, a recession. What if that happens? And then COVID happened. I was like, oh my God, that was not on my list. So there's so many things that you just cannot prepare.
And I think, that's what an amazing story, right? I think for me, Pomp, you mentioned this. One theme that you both seem to have is just betting on yourself. The other thing that I've seen just from you, Polina, you just mentioned this, and Pomp, I see this literally on your Twitter profile too, is just learning, optimizing for learning. And there's just something about just pursuing knowledge, which I think is like really admirable. And it comes at, it's very easy to be like, well, I quit my job. I just like jumped into this thing and, adventure. Let's like find out what's happening. But it's incredibly risky. It's incredibly ambitious to think about it as like, I can go do this, but also from a perspective of learning. I think that's like, it's really admirable.
I think it's kind of, I mean, Pomp, you and I have known each other a lot longer. And, I think this kind of undercuts all of Pomp's work. And maybe, okay, this is a question I want to ask you. I'll ask you this in private, but it's kind of fun to ask you this over here.
You better remember what you said on private.
Well, we'll see. We'll
hold me honest. Don't worry.
No, but I would say Pomp is a super generous person. He's the person I usually ask. About a few years ago when I left Twitter, I was like, hey, I want to do this content thing. And then I call up every once in a while for advice, and always so generous. But maybe, look, I mean, if somebody, went to sleep like 6 years ago and woke up today, you're like, okay, here you are, Facebook product manager. If I had to project out then, you'd have been like, in some tech role or maybe in, full-fledged venture capital. But here you are with millions of followers on Twitter, on YouTube, doing a popular podcast. So deconstruct maybe your journey and your system for how to do so, because it is quite remarkable. And I think a lot of people want to follow in your footsteps.
Yeah, there was no master plan, obviously. Actually, one of the unique things was while I was at Facebook, I had helped a number of different brands Facebook's like a weird place where like you have your job and then like you do a bunch of other stuff. Google has 20% time or whatever, but Facebook's not as structured. And because I was the product manager for the Facebook pages growth team, a lot of times what would happen is somebody would be like the brand manager or like the point of contact for, I remember there's an Instagram account, Fuck Jerry, right? Which is like kind of a meme account. And somehow I got introduced to that team and they were like, they're trying to figure out what to do on Facebook. Like they're big on Instagram, but like, how do they figure out Facebook? And so this kept happening. And so it made me think about like, hey, how do you build an audience using Facebook pages? And I understood the system and all stuff. At one point, I worked very closely with Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg to help them do something very similar for their own personal pages without them actually changing the algorithm or changing the product. They wanted to figure out, hey, how do we create content? And frankly, they probably don't get the credit, but they were very early to the go direct kind of movement. And we're talking, at the end of 2014, they're talking about how do we talk directly to our users without having to go through other channels. So pretty forward thinking on their part. But by the time it got to like the beginning of 2017, I was like, I've helped all these other people do this. And like, I've never done it for myself.
Yeah.
And so that was really the start, was like, oh, like I should try one platform. And frankly, I didn't think I had enough knowledge of what I wanted to do to like do video or audio or any of this other stuff. So I started on Twitter. It was just text-based. And Polina is joking, but also serious. Like she literally had more Twitter followers than me. And so I'm just like a very,
that pissed them off.
very competitive person, not to compete with her, but just like, there's a number. And this speaks to, I think, the positives and negatives of social media, but it was like, okay, how do I move that number? Right. And literally I ran a growth team at Facebook. Like that's what we did all day long, was we just laid awake at night. Like, how do we move this number? And so obviously you very quickly figure out all the different things you can do to do that. And now we're into like May of 2018. So it's like been a year and a half of just Twitter. And this is right about the time that there was, it was starting to become obvious that deplatforming was going to be a thing. Right. And so there had already been a couple of people who'd been removed, and it was like very obvious, like, oh, those are the extreme people, by most people's standards, but like what stops them from just breaking the extreme, kind of boundary in closer, and like eventually like we're all deplatformed. And so we were on a flight and Polina was like, well, if you're worried about that stuff, like why don't you just like create an email? And I was like, like that sounds crazy. That's your thing. Like I'm not really good at that, whatever. And she eventually convinced me. And I'm the type of person where she like, we're literally on the plane. She's like, just do it. And I like went and I signed up for Substack. I think I was like one of the first, 20, 40, 50 people, whatever on there. And I was just like, I have to write an email and send it tomorrow or like, I will not do this. Right. And so I started and then just every single day, just do it over and over again. And so it was like Twitter, the email, then I did the podcast and then eventually YouTube. And I would say that the two lessons I learned over time was like, one, I had to do it every day. If I didn't do it every day, I would eventually just like give up on it. And so there was like, I joke a lot about like the relentless aspect of it, but like that's literally what it was, is just like get up, do it, move on. And those little actions lead to kind of bigger progress. And then the other thing was I have no fear whatsoever of being wrong in public, which like pisses some people off on the internet because they're like, this guy's wrong. And I'm like, yeah, so are you. I just am willing to like admit it publicly, right? Like I'm wrong every day. But like, hopefully I'm just like right 51% of the time and wrong 49%. Like I'll be okay. And so what that allows me to do today and allowed me to do over time was just like, go pursue the things that I was intellectually like curious about. And I think when you approach it from hey, I'm trying to learn, people are just like, yeah, I'm trying to do that too. Like you don't approach it kind of from the institutional, I have all the answers, there's certainty, like, whatever. And I would say the things that in hindsight over, 5-6 years, you create a bunch of content, put it on the internet, like you eventually look back, you're like, that thing, like, if I could go back, I would do it differently, or I would have said something different, or, it was live and I said whatever. It's always around like certainty, right? It's always around whatever. And I think that that's like a big balance now is that like, how do you keep the intellectual curiosity? And you almost have to like slay your own ego to some degree, because the bigger the audience becomes, they're looking at you like, oh, you know what you're talking about. But I think actually the people I admire the most on the internet are the people who have huge audiences and they're like, no, like I'm an idiot. Like I'm a complete moron. And then I think that intellectual humility ends up actually letting them keep asking dumb questions, keep the curiosity going. And, as we know in hindsight, like that's what leads to the audience growth.
I think, by the way, I want to say, Pomp's saying here today what exact same thing I remember a few years ago when I called you and asked you for advice on how to do content. You said a lot of people ask me this and they'll never do what I'm just going to tell you, which is you got to do it every day, right? Pick something. You can write a tweet, you can write an email, write smoke signal, whatever it is, but you've got to do it every day. And he also said, like, most people ask me this, get this answer, and then don't follow through. So I don't know whether I've done it every day, but I still remember that the grind.
I think at some point you asked me to talk to Pomp too. And I got on a call with you and I was like, I have like, this is like pre-good time show, just when we were starting. And you were like, you said the same thing. You were like, you just have to go do it. Like, that's literally the only advice I can give you. And it might really suck in the beginning, but you're just going to have to like build muscle and just like start doing the shows. And most people will hang up this phone call and then be like, yeah, that was great advice, and never follow through. So don't be one of them. And I was like, thanks. That's great.
So let's get into this, because I try and study you, and you do have hundreds of episodes of your podcast. So what makes for a good conversation, and who are good guests and terrible guests? And I prefer names on either.
All right. So I'm going to answer the podcast in a second, but let's answer the good conversation first. Polina and I actually talk about this quite often. And if you think of good conversation, that could be dinner, that could be somebody you meet randomly on the street, that could be a podcast. Like there's so many different ways. What is the one thing that you think makes the best conversation? And I'm wondering if she's going to say the thing that I believe she's going to say.
Well, so there's two. Can I say two? Okay. So people who cut out the small talk and get to the meat of it.
Yeah. No chit chat.
And people who ask a lot of questions. I think we've been to dinners where, we went to one dinner with one couple that I will not name. And I was really looking forward to the conversation because they were both very interesting people on the internet. And then you sit down and it's like, I don't even think they knew my name. Like, we were just peppering them with questions, but it was just a monologue.
They're not curious at all.
Yeah.
So I thought you were going to say,
when we go to grab dinner with these two,
I was just
No,
going
we
to
can't
say.
tell people. If we tell people this in public, then they're not going to answer all of our questions.
No, I want.
The thing that I thought she was going to say, which is tangentially related, is the quality of the conversation a lot of times is dictated by the quality of the questions.
Yeah.
And that works in both directions, right? Yeah. So like it feeds back into kind of the no chit chat thing as well. We like the word chit chat because we have a couple friend that
you should say who it is.
I don't want to put him on blast, but he is known as Mr. No Chit Chat. He one time spoke one word to a grocery store cashier, and it was like a momentous occasion because he's just direct to the point all the time. But I think what happens is, like, if you ask good questions and you're talking to someone that's halfway interesting, then it should be an interesting conversation. But Polina one time said to me,
wait, can I tell them?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
So, okay, sorry. I love this question.
No, this is great. Yeah.
In college, I majored in journalism, and we had this like intro to journalism class. And the assignment was to profile someone. So I was like, oh, amazing, right? So you pick a random person and you write a profile on them. And I feel like I don't remember who it was, but it was like a fellow student that I picked. Mm-hmm. And then I asked them questions, but they were the person I thought gave me just super superficial, boring answers. So I went back to my professor and I said, I got to pick somebody else. Like, this is probably the most boring person I've ever come into contact with. And somehow I picked them. And so my professor realized that, like, I hadn't done my job as an interviewer. So he didn't let me switch. He said, they're only boring because you haven't asked them the right questions yet. So that kind of always stuck with me in conversation and writing. It's not up to the person to entertain you and make the story interesting. It's up to you to ask the right questions to, like, tease it out of them.
So both of you, kind of professional question askers in a way. When you go into a conversation, especially, something like this, we're kind of having fun, but let's say a podcast, if you study like the greats, like Howard Stern, Larry King, you see this multitude of techniques. Some people are incredibly prepared. And they are like, okay, I'm going to ask you these things, and they go deep in research. Like Lex Friedman's a good example, very prepared, very structured in how he goes about it. And then there are others who are like, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to almost know nothing and go with the flow. Larry King was famous for not doing research, and he was like, I'm just going to go in, go with the flow and see where it takes me. And a lot of people fall in the spectrum. So when you go into a conversation, especially one on air, how much are you preparing? How much are you going with the flow? How much are you thinking, wait, I need to get this person to go here because I need to ask this? How are you managing the conversation?
Go ahead. You go first because you're way more prepared than me.
We have very different approaches. But to me, my most successful so I over-prepare. I read everything that's been written on this person. If they have a book, I try to read the book. If they've done podcasts, I listen to podcasts, etc. But then that helps me realize, like, the questions that they get asked the most, I don't want to ask those questions. So I try to ask something a little bit different. And then during the conversation, though, I listen. Like, I actively try to listen to everything, because the best interviews are when somebody makes an offhand comment and you catch that, and then you ask a follow-up on that, out of nowhere. So for me, I mean, I've gotten scoops that way. I've gotten a lot of things that way just by listening and not being like clinical about question 1, question 2, question 3.
It's amazing you say that, because to me, that is the magic, where you kind of capture that moment of them saying something that's like not part of their script. Exactly. And then you're like, oh, wait, why? Mm-hmm. And then you start like pulling that thread. And that, I think, leads to much more interesting conversations than the script that they expect or you're expected to ask and all of that. Like, that stuff is just this like kabuki dance that you kind of like have to get out of the way. And then the fun part happens in those like little moments that come in between.
Exactly. And it's something that's very, very hard, especially if you work at a place like Fortune or Forbes, where you're interviewing super media trained CEOs all the time. You need more than 30 minutes to get that out.
It's also, I think, like, in an interview for journalism where you're trying to maybe get, a scoop or information. That's different. I think in a podcast, and Pom, I'm curious how you think about this, which is sometimes there are guests who are just on their talking points and are structured, and how do you shake them off this? How do you kind of attack, maybe tricky guests? Yeah. Feel free to use names.
So here's what I would say is I've gone back and forth. Like I didn't have experience doing it when I started in 2018, right? I just literally was like, oh, this is a microphone. Like, let's just have a conversation. And so in the beginning, I prepared a lot because frankly, I didn't want to sound stupid to them, right? Because I was like, oh, I don't know nothing about this. Like, let me at least have like a little base knowledge. And that got really boring very quickly because I basically knew what the conversation was going to be before I had it. And so I was like, this sucks. Like, I felt like I was wasting my time, even though the audience liked the episodes. So then I stopped doing any preparation, like over rotate on the other side. And then I would finish. And then like afterwards, I'd be talking to them like, damn, I wish I had known that. I would have asked you about it or whatever. So I've kind of found like a happy medium of, I obviously know who the person is. I know maybe like 3 or 4 bullet points about their background. And then I'll have some bullet points like on topics, but I may not even know what their position is on it. Right. And I don't look at it as an interview, which I think like obviously journalism is very different. And some people treat their podcasts that way. I look at it much more as like, I want to learn. And so let's have a conversation about a topic. And the reason why that's important is because in the learning process of having a conversation, it's not me just extracting information out of you. Like I'm happy to, if they say something like take it in a completely different direction and be like, oh, well, what about this thing that I'm not even an expert on? It's just like, tell me what you think. So that leads to like what makes a good guest and a bad guest. There's 2 frameworks I would use. If a guest asks for anything to be edited out afterwards, not a good episode. Like 100% guaranteed, that sucks.
How often does it happen?
All the people who are media trained, they always have either them or somebody else. And then 2 is, I would say that, I'll give you a good example. I don't want to say who it was, but there's an episode I recorded. Obviously, this person and I both knew that we were going to talk about some topics that, were on the fringe. And I was like, look, man, you can afterwards listen to it. If you want me to edit anything out, like happy to do it. I don't want to, no gotcha questions, all that type of stuff. And we recorded the whole thing. I sent it to him. He responds to me literally with, man, it got a little hairy when we talked about X, but fuck it. If they come for me, they come for me. So like, that is a good guest. Yeah. That is somebody who is willing to speak their mind, tell the truth, like whatever, right?
How much of that editing request is because they just want to come across as if, they're like, media trained, or they want to have this perfect story, that kind of thing. Like I find that sometimes even if they're okay with it, they just want to like tell you, oh, edits over here or there, kind of thing. Like how much
sometimes people just want to like tell you edits because you gave them the option to give edits. So they feel like that's like they did their homework. Yeah. Polina one time said to me something to the effect of like, the people who want to like correct the record, right? Or like, are like really worried about something. Nobody cares what they say, right? Like nobody cares about that. And so like, obviously they're coming on the podcast. Like I find them interesting in some way. I think when Polina interviews people, same thing. But the other thing I would say is like, what makes the best guest? It's the guest who can come in and like, we can sit down and we can literally talk about anything.
Yeah.
Like you could be like, hey, the color of the carpet is black. Like, hey, one time I went to this place and like I saw how carpet was made, and like next thing you know, you've been talking for 3.5 hours, and you're like, how did we talk about like carpet and then this conspiracy theory and then like this thing, and you're just like, oh, you're just like a cool person, right? Yeah. And part of the problem is that those people are hard to identify sometimes because you see someone who's good at writing, as an example, or you see someone who's good at something else,
and
then they get in front of the microphone
and
this
just translate. Yeah.
Before the interview, they're like, yeah. And then the interview starts like, and then yes, okay, yes. Yeah. And they like get real quiet and they kind of like, and you're like, no, like what just happened? Like,
what happened to that person?
I think one of my theories, by the way, this is really tied to kind of PR, comms, and sometimes good reason. Like for example, when I was in all these big tech companies, I was so trained to be on message, have the smallest possible surface area where you could get into trouble. Because it's sort of a random Facebook product manager. The upside of creating press was the downside of saying something wrong or an inadvertent scoop to one of Polina's ex-colleagues would be bad, right? And it took me a long time and maybe a long way to go before I get as interesting as either of you, before I feel like I can be myself, get my personality and Aarthi's personality out there, and I don't have to be, well, the way we think about it at company X is we are trying to serve humanity and blah, blah, blah. And, it took me a long time to train myself out of that.
And also you realize that people don't like that. Like that whole spiel is just so boring. Even, even on the other side, it's like people who are like writing down these interviews are like, okay, that's snoozy. Like, Tell me
I
something
call it
that's
a
real.
word salad.
Tell them
Yeah,
about
it's
the
a word
sport.
salad.
Tell them
Exactly.
about the sports athletes.
Oh my God. So when I was in college, like everybody had a beat, right, at the newspaper. Mine was always like the administration and covering like the finances. I would sit in on meetings. It was interesting to learn like basically the story, follow the money is what I took away from that. But there was then the crime beat and then the sports beat. And I used to say, like, I feel like sports writers have the hardest job because I went to the University of Georgia where there's a ton of athletes. And then the quotes are just so, I mean, they're the same. You ask them like, so what happened with the game? You're never going to get something super unique. It's like, we came together as a team. We really got after it. And then a few like cliches in there about like, we are one. And then that's it.
We'll work hard and we'll be back next week.
Yeah, the Bill Belichick style of press conference.
Yeah.
I'm going to get to the really fun, spicy topic now. So, and this is something very relevant to us. So, you folks are unique because I think, the four of us might be, some of the couples doing content often together, right? And I don't think there's too many of us instead of the, the little YouTube, Twitterverse that we inhabit. So, how is it to work together on air, as content creators, outside of just being, married, now being parents, congratulations, and all of that, right? And I think we have our own takes too, but I want to kind of hear from both of you.
All right, can I start?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So
we only care about what you have to say. Like Pomp is just like,
I'm an expert husband. I wasn't going to speak first and potentially lay down a trap for myself.
No, one time I was like, isn't it crazy how it's only that I get mad at you and you never get mad at me. It's clearly because I'm an angel and I do no wrong. He's like, that's not at all what that means. But when we first started doing content in the form of the Lunch Money Show in 2020, it was really interesting because if you look at those first episodes, I was exactly what he described earlier. Like, you have your personality, but then you get in front of the camera and I was just like very stiff. I didn't really talk. I was nervous and I was scared of saying the wrong thing because I think I'm a way better writer than I am on camera. So then it was really interesting because now I look back at those early days and I'm like, oh, look, this is the video where I got mad at you for this thing right before. And this is the time where and it's just like, I have a really hard time putting my like emotions to the side and then being like, hello, and putting on a face. But over time, I think we've like learned how to work together much, much, much better. And it all stems from like communication and being like, I don't think you meant to do this thing, but it annoyed me. So therefore, right.
Mr. Pompliano, how do you respond?
I think that's all accurate. The biggest thing around content today is like, to some degree, Polina was really good at doing her job because she knew how to play the game of journalism inside the institution, like all that type of stuff. And probably the reason why I was able to build an audience on the internet is because like I knew how to play that game, right? And they're like two completely different games. Yeah. But I would caution people that like I learned a lot from Polina because I saw like, well, how did they do it? Like they've been doing it for decades, right? And so like, what can you learn and take away? And like, sure, it's no secret. Like I think a lot of it's nonsense, right? And I think that those people are, if they were good at their jobs, they would go do it on the internet themselves, but they can't. So they need the brand to like protect them, right? Mm-hmm. And we've seen it. The best tend to leave and go and build these great bodies, and they were amazing journalists before and they're still amazing journalists today, and now they just do it for themselves, which begs the question, like if you haven't left yet, why? And it could just be, hey, you like the security of a job, great, that's a perfectly fine answer. But for most people, it's because they couldn't survive on the internet without the brand. And so that doesn't mean though that we can't learn from how do they do things, like everything from like how do they do the production process of content to how do they think about, interviewing, what are the stories they find interesting or not interesting, and all that type of stuff. So I think that's like one big piece of it. The flip side of that is on the internet, like it is war, right? And people, I think there's a lot of people who they don't want to wake up every day and go to war. And so what you find is when you start out, it's all rosy. But like, what do you do the first time that someone's like, you're dumb?
Right? I cried.
But I wasn't going to tell that story.
It really gets to you. I mean, when we get negative comments, right? And it could be on everything. It's better if it's on your content. Sometimes it could be on your appearance or something totally random, and it does get to you. And I think a lot of people have thick skins, but we haven't really figured out how to do that yet.
I don't know. I kind of have this like Michael Jordan thing. It just motivates me.
Yes.
I love that. I'm like, keep it coming. Like, this is the thing that's going to let me wake up tomorrow and do better.
I would stop her from chasing down YouTube commenters. So for you mean comments on this episode, trust me, Aarthi is Googling you and finding where you live.
But like, if you think about like comments is like a piece of it. I would almost break it into a couple of buckets, right? There's like obviously like mean comments, which I don't think anyone wants to read, but like that's part of the internet, and you got to decide, are you going to be a comment reader or are you not, right? And like there's pros and cons to both, but that's like one piece of it. Then there's like what I consider like the passive aggressiveness, where like the like reply guys come in.
Oh yeah.
Everyone has that one person that always replies to their tweet, and you're just like, you're a loser, right? But like whatever, you're gonna keep responding to the tweet, like knock yourself out. Then there's like direct confrontation. And I think that if you look at it, like most people will deal with the comments because they kind of have to, right? And they'll just choose maybe the absolute worst response is like, hey, I'm just not going to read it. Fine. Okay. Not a big deal. The passive aggressive, the mature people just like let it go. The immature people like me, right, are like, no, like screw you. And they like respond back. But then when it comes to the direct confrontation, I always think of like, that's where the professionals are made, because there's only two responses you can have. You completely ignore forever. One of the fascinating things, LeBron James has never responded to Skip Bayless.
Yep.
In almost 2 decades, Skip Bayless has tried to school him, has tried to defame him. I mean, like anything he possibly could, he has said to LeBron, and LeBron has never responded.
It's a power move.
Okay. So what's the other kind? That's the one I want to know for professionals.
When someone shows up with a flamethrower, you show up with one 2 times as big. I mean, that's the only 2 responses, because anything in the middle is basically you're like showing up to a gunfight with a water gun. So like you have to choose who you are.
The problem though is that like the internet is no place for logic and
zero
nuance. Yeah.
It pulls you kind of to the extremes.
You either have to have discipline to ignore it, which like I think most people aspire to, but we're all human, or let's go. It's wartime.
So 2 comments. On the LeBron thing, I always think about that Mad Men scene where Draper is in the lift with the other guy, and he says, I feel sorry for you. And Draper says, I don't think of you at all. Yeah. That's the go-to. But I would say among the 2 of us, I have to stop Aarthi so many times from going after somebody on Twitter. Right?
Wait, I'm like, what happened? Are you crazy?
I mean, I'm in the Balaji school here. It's like you bring a flamethrower, I'm fucking bringing like 5 of those and just coming after you. So.
And I'm going. I can't say that. And okay, go for it. But sometimes it gets upsetting. It's been a year.
I used to show him like stuff that I would like respond and Sriram be like, you can't post that. And now I just don't like.
So you are the Anthony in the relationship.
Polina once a week is like, no, just like you, like, come on. Like you say a lot of crazy things on the internet, like that one, just put that one in the drafts, just leave it there.
Oh my goodness. It does get Aarthi just tweets stuff once, but I'm like, okay, fine. Like, but yeah, she's the spicy one. Okay. All right. Okay. I want to run past some names with the both of you, starting with you, Pomp, and I want to kind of hear your take on these people. And Pomp, there's one internet personality that I want to start with. Who am I going to ask you about?
All right.
Okay, so you went super viral recently, and I'm worried if I say his name, will this video get banned from YouTube?
Yes, I mean, too late for that. Did we mention the pandemic? They're already banned.
Okay. So you had a super viral video with Mr. The Top G himself, Andrew Tate, and I have so many questions about that. But what struck me was you interviewed him over a year ago, and you posted the video recently, and it went super viral because he's having quite the moment. Just talk to us about the experience and how was that, and just your take on him.
Yeah, I mean, look, I met Andrew maybe 2 or 3 years ago at this point. It was over Twitter. It was around Bitcoin stuff, and he messaged me and said he was in Miami. And we were like, cool, let's do a podcast. This is like maybe, I don't know, March, April, May of 2021. And I didn't know what to expect. Like, you know, he had a lot of same ideas and thoughts and everything that he was sharing now, but obviously didn't have all the attention that he has today. So like, it was kind of anticlimactic, I think, if people hear it now, because it was just like, hey, I'm going to like meet this guy. He seems interesting. Let's have a conversation. As I started the podcast episode with, he wore sunglasses the entire time. And I was like, this is going to be different. And I think that his opening line was like, you have to wear the shades to see the fire I'm about to bring.
Yes,
like,
I know.
For an hour and 40 minutes, he did not disappoint. He definitely brought it. And look, I think that there was a couple of, things in the conversation, but what I would point to is like at the very end of the conversation, he asked me like, what's the one thing that you disagree with? And I was like, no, actually, it's not just like one thing. It's just like you're saying things that have like these kernels of truth in them. And I think just if you said them, people would be like, oh, yeah, that's probably true. But then he wraps it in this like kind of bombastic, a very entertaining wrapper. And that's what gets everyone all worked up. Some people love it and they're like, oh my God, this guy's amazing. Like he's my hero. I'm, the 18-year-old guy that everyone's worried about now looks up to Andrew Tate. And then other people are like, this is like the devil and like kick him off the internet. Right. And so if you really boil it down, like his message, there's one clip that we took and we posted it. And his message was like, hey, there's a lot of things in society that you're being fed that is literally just trying to divide the population. We are stronger together. Like there's a person who ran for president with that slogan, stronger together, right? And so like, by the way, they delivered those messages in about as opposite of an extreme as possible. One ran for president and like one ran for like, I don't know, president of the internet, right? And so when you think of that, one big takeaway was just like the way you deliver a message. It could be the exact same message, but like you can really pull on the extremes of how you deliver messages. The second thing was everyone gets really worked up and thinks that the people they see on the internet are the real people. Nobody you see on the internet is the real person they are in real life, right? It's like they naturally become a caricature and they're like playing this like role, which is like fine. Like that's okay. You do the same thing at work. How many people actually are like their true self, whatever that's supposed to mean, right? Like at work. Like not that many, right? You put on different clothes, you act differently in a meeting, you may not curse as much, or you're like nicer to people, whatever. That is like a normal part of like human experience. But we're like shocked when we see somebody on the internet. And I think it's because we're like, that can't be real. Like that person is like crazy or whatever. And you're like, no, like that person understands the psychology of humans way better than most. And it scares people because they're like, oh, wait, is that person smart? Like that person that's yelling and screaming and saying all these radical things, that person's intelligent. We can't have that, right? And I think that's where you see, a lot of
we can't have that in this direction.
We can't have that in this direction. And then also, like, I will say one thing, which like this personally really upset me, is we did the whole interview. I rewatched it before we released it. Because I was like, look, like I don't ever want a guest to come on and say something and people think that like I'm condoning what they're saying.
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't want to censor people and not have a conversation because I'm worried what the crowd thinks. Like, I don't care what the crowd thinks. I want to be able to sit there and say like the conversations I have or the conversations I have, and like people know where I stand on certain issues. And if somebody says something crazy, then like people should know, hey, I don't agree with that. In the interview, he tells a story of he basically got in a bar fight. Right. And somebody, according to his take, physically hit him first and he got in a fight. And he was fighting 3 guys. There was a girl there who supposedly also hit him. And as he was fighting back, he struck her. Now, the way he tells the story is he went to court and eventually he's found like innocent, like all this stuff and everything. And so like, as you're listening to it, you're like, okay, there's a bar fight. Like you can almost imagine this scene in the he's taking it. There's an article written later in NBC News. And they're like, on the Pomp podcast, Andrew Tate says that he hits women. And I was just like, if you have no context, you're like, man, that guy's a scumbag, right? Like maybe both of them are bad people. And it was like, okay, so guess what we did? Like I and the team sat down and we were like, what did we miss? Because I felt bad. I was like, oh my God, like people think that I'm like condoning this. And we took the whole thing and it was like, man, what is being written in this article and like what is being said in the podcast are very different. By the way, I don't think that the media or I should be the judge of like right and wrong in these scenarios when it goes to court and the court decides something. And so it's like this very weird situation where I think it was one of the most recent examples where I saw it does not matter what you put on the internet. Someone can find a way to twist it into whatever narrative they want. It's kind of like data. Like you can make it say whatever you want. I think we're now seeing a world where like we could take this interview, and if we took the worst parts of like the, mainstream media, we could twist something in this interview and be like, oh my God, do you know what Sriram believes?
Yeah.
Right? And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, that's not what I believe though.
Yeah. Has it changed how you ask questions now? Like just seeing how it gets depicted later on? Or do you change any of your methods or tactics of how you talk to guests?
Yeah, I'm human and I hate that I do it, but I caveat questions.
Yeah.
I like ask stuff. I'm like, well, I stand on this side, but like, what do you think? And it's like, this is so stupid that I have to reiterate that like, I don't agree with X topic. Right. And so I think that the ramifications are really hard to identify in the short term, but over a long period of time, there's like this self-censorship that starts to happen. Yeah. And, like bad things are bad things. And I think that audiences are smart enough to recognize when a host is asking a question and trying to understand something versus the host is like, I also agree with this bad thing that society already thinks is a bad thing. Right.
Yeah. Well, I think you just spun out two of my favorite things about the interview that you did with Tate. First was, I think, the moment at the very end where you almost break down a system.
Yeah,
and,
that was great.
It was great. And you can almost see his kind of character drop off for a second, and he says,
for 1 second,
there's a smile that comes on his face, and he's like, "Oh my God, somebody figured me out."
That's the headline: Pomp broke Andrew Tate.
That's the clip. I am curious. Is he different off camera than when the camera's on?
He is the type of person that I think most people, if they knew nothing about the internet and met him, they'd be like, that guy was smart and he was a nice guy. I'm sure there's times just like anyone, like, hey, you end up, you're a nice person 95, 98% of the time. And like, you snap, you're emotional, whatever. But I think that many people would be surprised if they sat and hung with him. That's not only just true of Andrew Tate. I think that's true of like many people on the internet. That people are like, oh, that's a horrible person. It's like, have you ever sat down and talked to that person? Like, you may think something completely different, but like, that's not how the world works.
Yeah. Okay. So Polina, I want to ask you this because I don't know whether you know this about me, but I am obsessed with pro wrestling. I've grown up as a fan. I'm obsessed with it. I go to all the WrestleManias. I think Pomp might know this, but I'm obsessed with pro wrestling.
We have a title belt here.
A WWE title right here.
Literally pro wrestling. That's one of his favorite things.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a whole theory about how pro wrestling is basically the keys to life. But so when
the video editor, Matt, he told me that too.
It is true. Well, there's so much about you can learn about life from pro wrestling. And in fact, if you look at, say, everyone from the former president to Tate, you see so many elements of pro wrestling, like the gimmick, living the character, face versus heel. I have a whole theory on this, which Aarthi will give me for because I go this way.
No, I think it's very entertaining. I just think it takes the analogy a little too far. Like every aspect of life is now like, that's like, you're putting him over. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. Just like move
on. Let me explain. Well, over in pro wrestling parlance is what Andrew Tate has done, which is like you have an audience which now reacts to you. Now you can be a face, which is a good person, a good guy or woman, and the audience cheers for you. Or you can be a heel, which is a bad person, and they boo you. But the one thing you can't be is somebody that is ignored, right? You can't be ignored. That is the worst thing. You either need people to cheer you on or boo you. Even better if you have one set of people cheering on and another set of people booing you, because that's magic. And when I look at leading politicians, when I look at Andrew Tate, they have done versions of... Anyway, so TLDR, I'm obsessed with pro wrestling, which is...
What was the question?
Which is why I love your profile of Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, right? Probably, he's on the Mount Rushmore of pro wrestlers, and then you had interaction with him. So talk to us about, what do you think, give us the secrets to The Rock. What do you think he does right? Because the story is fascinating.
Yeah. Ooh. I think The Rock is the type of person, he says, find your hole in the wall opportunity. So he claims that growing up and then in his career, he would see like a kernel of like a tiny thing, and then he would just like go full speed ahead and like make it into a bigger hole, basically. But he's somebody who he says like, always keep your failures at the forefront of your mind, because I think there's a sense as we get more successful and people become, more well respected, that there's a sense of complacency that comes, and to stay on top of your game is really, really difficult. So I think that's his point of like, keep the failures at the forefront of your mind, because he's like, I'm always this close from getting evicted. I'm always this close of like going to jail and all the things that he went through as a kid. He's like, I'm still there. And I think that that's why he's enjoyed the success that he's had.
And how was it when he tweeted out to you?
That was crazy. So the story was, this happened the day before Christmas, and I was visiting family in Atlanta, and I was on a walk with my dad, and we were walking by this river. We were just chatting, and like, I took out my phone and I just saw like 81 text messages and tweets and emails. And I was like, oh my God, Dad, hold on 1 second. I think I got canceled.
What did Pomp say now?
Exactly. I was like, that feeling when you get really hot and like your stomach gets all crazy. I was like, oh no, something happened. And then I read, and then it's like, actually, I saw your text and was like, oh my God, The Rock. And I was like, what happened? And then I saw that basically I published this dossier. I do these deep dives into individual people and break down kind of their successes and careers and stuff. And I had done one on him. And then I had tagged him when I published it. And he happened not only to see it, but to read it, like it, retweet it. I think he tweeted about it 4 times. Then he put it on Instagram, and then he put it on Facebook. And then I ended up on national news in Bulgaria.
Were your parents proud?
Oh my God, my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, they were like, oh, you're on TV with The Rock.
They're like, you're friends with The Rock.
Yeah.
Like, when do we meet him?
I love it.
That was awesome.
That was a fantastic profile. I can see why he liked it. And by the way, I would say, when I was kind of preparing for this, one of my favorite episodes of the Pomp Show, Pomp has many favorite great episodes, is the one where both of you together break down various people like Kris Jenner,
Yes.
Keanu Reeves, right? We should drop a link in the comment. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Okay.
I did no work for that one, by the way. Polina brought all the information. I just asked questions. It was amazing. That was one of my favorite episodes as well.
Oh my God.
My favorite moment is the one that's like where Pomp is trying to like correct Polina, and I can see the brain in Pomp's head go like, should I push this issue? Okay, maybe I'll just kind of back off, right? Like,
You should never.
Every husband out there will know, like, if you hear 2 + 2 = 5, you're like, yep, that sounds good to me.
We have so much in common with
Especially that 2 + 2 = 5. Sriram would literally say that because he's not great at math.
I feel like me and Sriram are like a kindred spirits in you guys.
Like, he literally walked around at a dinner we hosted recently to showing our our second kid, our son, being like, he is 8 months old. I'm like, no, he's not. He's 7. And Sriram's like, what? And he's literally counting with his fingers, and he's like, oh yeah, he's 7 months old.
There's always
all the
1
same.
month.
It's all the same.
Yeah. Okay, I was going to ask you this, folks. So you folks are new parents, right? First of all, congratulations. And how much has that changed both of you? It's kind of like a deeper conversation, but also maybe changed the way you think about your content, storytelling, and approach to all things?
Yeah, we changed it dramatically. I think in the beginning, I was like, oh, it's okay. Like, if every once in a while, if we like post a picture of Sophia or something like that. And then I completely changed my view. And now there will be no tweeting, Instagramming, or videoing.
Why?
So why?
I'll just say it. A guy who I think had very nice intentions
he
came
had good
up to
intentions.
us in a coffee shop, and he was like, oh. And he knew the kid's name and was like, and I was like, we're done. We're done with this. This is
I think
this is getting weird, and you gotta
a little creepy. Yeah.
I think one of the pieces that there's an entire cohort of people who have been creating content on the internet. Let's call it like 2015, 2016 to today. So like in the last 10 years, which is a different period of time than like maybe like beginning of Facebook to like, 2015. right? That period of time was like the audience sizes were smaller. There were different types of content. It was much more niche. Like there wasn't as much monetization, like all this stuff. But like this new generation of people, if you call it, they're all going through the same arc. It's like get started, dopamine hit. This is awesome. Build a big audience. Get the big audience. Oh shit, I'm on a hamster wheel. Oh shit, everyone knows everything about my life. Oh shit, like
they expect to know even more about my life.
And people come up to you and they're like asking you questions. You're like, that's none of your fucking business. Right? like just to be like blunt, but like you want to be like, it's not their fault, right? Like they're
they have this parasocial relationship with you.
100%. And so I think that eventually you just got to like ask yourself, like, who do you want to be? What is the path that you want to take? And if you go back, like actually a lot of the people who were in that first generation of like people creating content on the internet, like, Tim Ferriss has a very, I think, articulate post about like, I don't want to be famous. It's like, well, like, hey, Tim, like a little late for that. Right. But the way that he writes it is not from like I regret as much as just like, here's the things I learned. And so I think that there's like a whole nother generation of people who are kind of going through this. And it goes back to like, do you want to be like famous and like not nearly as wealthy as everyone thinks you are? Or do you basically want to be successful and like known in the circles that you really care about? Like, do you want people's respect or do you want like fame? And as many people for decades and decades and decades before, in various industries have learned, like chasing the fame is somewhat of a little bit of like a, grasping at sand. And so I think that you got to find the balance, like what works for you, right? There's no one single, formula, but I think that's kind of where we ended up.
So kid stuff is off limits. What else changed for you with respect to like what's off topic when you're on air as such?
Or change the way you do content, right? Like how you approach content itself.
I think now it's much more like to get started goes back to the comment that I told both of you of just like, you got to do it every day. Like there's this element of like, you just have to use quantity and like momentum and velocity to build an audience on the internet. It's really hard to break through. And it's near impossible unless you have some, advantage pre-existing to just say like, hey, I'm going to produce one thing a week and like, it's going to be a home run. Like, it's just really hard to do that. And so usually the velocity ends up helping. But then once you get the audience, like you don't have to do it every day, like focus on the quality. So you have to kind of understand it's very similar to a business. Like first you have to build a product, you have to find product market fit, and you actually have to scale and kind of build the business around it. And, and understanding where you are in that journey is important. Yeah.
But what about having a child change that?
Oh, I think the child is, there's some people who operate their lives trying to get away from their kids or their wives, right? Like I've been to dinner and literally people are like, they like say it. They're like, yeah, I'm here. I got out of the house.
Yeah.
And you're like, dude, that like your life sucks, man.
Yep.
Like, come on. And so, you guys know, like you have young kids, like at some point, if you actually enjoy it, again, maybe you don't enjoy it, but if you actually enjoy it, like, you're like, I don't want to do this other stuff. I want to spend time with, my family. So
I once had a former coworker who called me at like 6 p.m. and he's like, it's my kids' dinner time, but I just wanted to like give you a call on this. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. Why don't we just chat in a couple of hours? And he's like, no, I really just didn't want to be there. And I was like, okay, that's good.
So let me actually,
please don't hang up.
Let me actually maybe, I have this theory on kids. Actually, I haven't even told Aarthi this, so which I was thinking about. So, not to make this too sad, but like my mom recently passed away, and it was fine. She was, but one of the things I realized was I didn't have a lot of content about her, right? Like, not enough photos, not enough videos, it was kind of like the age before, the iPhone and whatnot. And one thing I think about is, for all of us, like, someday, unless YouTube deplatforms us for all the Andrew Tate conversations, right? Our kids will, and maybe they don't want to, maybe they'll all hate us and they'll be like, we don't want to see this anymore, but they'll have like hours and hours of content of their parents looking hot and young and good, and
just go with the YouTube comments.
YouTube would have deleted them by now, or we'll figure out some way to.
You're not as good looking as you think, Sriram. It would be the first comment.
Well, delete, right? But I think there's something might be cool about your kids basically seeing their parents through their 30s, through their 40s, and hopefully, we all get to do this for years and years. And I think that could be kind of cool.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot, actually. And when I talked to Jim O'Shaughnessy, he said that the best gift you can give your kids is writing them letters. And whether it's a letter or a scrapbook or a video, I think it's kind of, it serves as a time capsule for the kid. And they're like, whoa, this is so cool. Like my dad recently visited and he brought these photo albums of like his, well, I guess mine too, but grandparents and great grandparents. So there's photos of like my grandfather when he was 19 years old, and we found 3 different girlfriends who none of whom were my grandmother. But like it's so cool to see.
Leave that man alone.
It's cool to see like what they wrote on the back of the photo. The photos were dated like 1929 or whatever. It was interesting that when they wrote dates, they would drop the 1. So it was like 929. It was very confusing. But it was like really cool. I was like, I'm holding something that's 100 years old. And I think that's going to be, and Jim actually said, what if we're actually living through one of the most interesting periods in history? Letters have a way of capturing that for your kids.
Yeah. I think when I've been trying to do that, not consistently, but I've been trying to write, I kind of send an email to myself, but I try and write a note every month to, first my daughter and like now both of her kids. Yeah. And it's just about like, it's often I just like a paragraph of like what they did the last month or what we went through in the last month. But I'm hoping over time, it kind of like becomes a thing. And look, maybe they just hate us and they'll be like, our parents are the most boring people ever. We don't read this. But like, maybe it's fun.
That's amazing.
Okay, so on maybe the profound topic, it's kind of getting to the end of this. Let's say you're looking back 20 years from now or 30 years from now, both of you, right? Like, what would make you happy, right, about the things that you're doing now? Obviously, you folks have a fantastic young family, and you're a lovely couple. You're building amazing content universe. The Pomp and Polina content universe. What would make you happy looking back 20 years from now? What would you want to have accomplished?
I know his answer. Do you want to
go ahead? You can say one.
It's so funny because I think Anthony gets asked this question a lot, and I think people expect something like, success or wealth or
Bitcoin somewhere.
Bitcoin or whatever. And his answer is always, I just want to look back and like be like, oh, that was the happiest time of my life, or like be happy. And happy is such a vague, like mushy term, but I think the way that you define it is, do you want to say?
Yeah, well,
it's just, okay.
I mean, it's literally just, if you think of like being happy, can you do the things that you want to do when you want to do them with the people you want to do them with?
Freedom.
Right? Like to some degree, that is what everyone wants to do. And you can look at it through the flip lens of when are people unhappy? They can't do something they want to do. They can't do it when they want to do it, or they can't do it with who they want to do it. And so if you can just have that freedom, obviously, yes, money is a piece of that, but also like there's like this weird like psychology component to it. There's also like some of the most important decisions you make are like who you marry, where you live, all these things that I think.
Who you have kids with.
Yeah, generally, hopefully that's the person you married.
Well,
hopefully those things have kind of permeated into, kind of the conversation, if you will. Mm-hmm. But I think that is a great reminder of just like, are you happy today? And if you're happy today and you can go to sleep and be like, man, today was fun, or like today I had a good day, and then do it again and again and again, it goes back to like the content creation stuff. It's just like the little things add up to the big things, and amazing.
And I'll say one more thing. Can I say? Okay.
It's your show.
I don't know why I keep asking you. I should be asking.
I know, Polina, this is your show. Like I'm telling you, he's just garnish here.
Yeah, we let it all the
yeah, get a microphone. I think I'm J-Lo. No. So the one thing that I was thinking. So my birthday's on Wednesday, and today I wrote this thing about like some of the lessons or things that I've thought about over the last year that I've learned, and one of them is, I think especially for parents with like, or first-time parents with newborns or babies, I think a lot of times it's like, you kind of feel like, oh my God, I didn't get enough sleep. There's toys all over the floor. Like it's just all the stuff all the time. And then I always remind myself that in 20 years, when I'm getting like 9-10 hours of sleep, but the house is quiet, even though everything's organized and it's in its place and everything, like you're going to refer to this messiness right now as like the good old days.
Oh yeah.
And I think about that a lot. So that just kind of like, it brings me back to, okay, enjoy this now because it's temporary.
What I took out of that is her birthday's on Wednesday, and I'm gonna have to get a gift now.
Oh my goodness, maybe
There you go.
I can't think of a better.
It's such a great note to end. And I want to say, even with like 2 kids for us, that hasn't changed. The second kid, we thought, we've seen this movie before, but no, it's amazing. It's really nice. It's
Wait, I want to ask you. Can I ask you guys a question?
Go for it. Yeah, sure.
What is the biggest lesson you've learned about like marriage and parenting, given that you've done both well?
Biggest lesson. Wow, that is so profound and deep. Sriram, you go first.
Oh wow. Okay. Okay. No pressure. Let me maybe.
Or something unexpected that you've learned.
Okay. Let me give maybe both a profound and a trivial answer. I think I think the key to a relationship is most life is just the mundane. You wake up, you kind of like go through your regular day, you brush your teeth, you do some email or whatever it is. And I think you have to find the person, the things which makes the mundane happy, right? It's not the date nights, it's not the vacations, it's not the big moments, and those are amazing. But just statistically, most life is the mundane. So I think, you have to find somebody that, and I think when the Aarthi is going to use this, I'm going to steal this line, right? You have to be happy, just kind of like sit on the couch next to each other and just do email, right? Like, or just do your thing, or, and because that's going to be a lot of time that you spend, which is not going to be like super deep, meaningful conversation. And I think it's important to find somebody that you can just be bored and be mundane with, and, because that is going to be so much of life.
Wow. Okay.
Did I get that right?
Did I get that right? We practiced, but not well enough, clearly.
I'm going to yell that later.
No, I also think it's like it's we met each other when we've known each other for more than half our lives now.
Wow.
So we've now spent enough time knowing each other than not knowing each other, being alive. That's kind of crazy to think about. And so we are the 2 people we've known each other the most through our adult life, which means like, I think for us, it's weird because with most of the couples, like we talk to them, we go to these dinners and all of that. And it's like, it's a different relationship. And, we've had these dinners, like what you'd said, where it's like, there are no questions. And it's very like, I'm like, oh my God, do they like get along with each other? Are they okay in their lives? And for us, like, there's like, we are bickering, we are fighting, we're happy, like everything, like there's this whole movie that plays out during this dinner. And we're seeing the whole thing play out, and we wouldn't have it any other way, right? Like this is kind of how it is for us. And so I think it's just fun. Like it's fun to like live this life with somebody. And I think it's like a lot of people don't have that. And I just think we're like grateful to have that.
I love this.
Yeah.
You guys need to come to Miami so we can.
They're gonna move.
Okay.
They're gonna move. You guys heard it here first. Both of them are moving to Miami.
Yeah. You know what? We should do we should kind of do an offshoot of a channel, just kind of like relationships and couples advice. I think it'll be a total banger. Okay. I just want to say you folks are both so lovely, so accomplished. Congratulations on all the success, on the amazing family. And
just finding happiness, being curious, just continuing to learn, just
trying to keep up with you guys.
I don't know. You guys folks are amazing. So you don't plan for them on and Pomp, go and buy a birthday gift for Polina. You need to get on that.
I already have an idea as to what I might get her.
All right.
Nice. That's awesome.
All right. Well, this was a blast. Thank you so much. And we should do this again in person in Miami.
You got it. Thank you guys.
Thank you. Thanks so much.